Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about a housing association that found out I was rich. After years of hard work, I managed to purchase my dream property. A beautifully restored, sprawling house tucked away on a quiet street in a residential neighborhood. It has a large backyard, complete with an old oak tree shading one corner of the lawn, and a small pond near the back fence that I like to stock with fish during the warmer months. The house is older, with a certain rustic charm, but because of its age, many people seem to underestimate its actual value, or more specifically, they underestimate my financial situation. I had moved in about 6 months prior to everything that went down with the local homeowners association. I wasn't even aware that there was an HOA when I bought the place. Nothing in my paperwork had indicated a mandatory membership. From what I gathered, the previous owners had intentionally structured their purchase in such a way that the house was excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction. The reason was never entirely clear to me, but it might have had something to do with older neighborhood covenants that never got updated. In any case, I ended up inheriting that same set of circumstances. Though my house was in the same neighborhood, it was not subject to the same HOA rules and fees. The first couple of months were fairly peaceful. I was busy settling in, learning the quirks of my property, like which sprinklers had malfunctioned over the years, how the heated floors in the bathroom sometimes needed special attention, and which parts of the roof needed repairs before the first big storm. Occasionally, I'd see neighbors out walking their dogs or jogging. They all seemed friendly in passing, but nobody really approached me for anything more than a wave and a quick greeting. My biggest annoyance was trying to figure out the trash collection schedule, because our street had different pickup days depending on which side you lived on. Yet, overall, life was good. One day, however, I pulled into my driveway in a car that my family had given me, a sporty model that I had always admired but never envisioned owning. I'd previously been driving around in a very basic old sedan. Since I work from home and don't go out often, I never felt the need for anything fancy. But my parents insisted I take this car as a gift when they decided to upgrade their own vehicles. Though it was a generous present, I accepted with the understanding that I'd use it occasionally for special outings and maintain the older car for everyday errands. Driving that newer, more luxurious car around the block apparently opened the eyes of some people in the neighborhood. 2 days after I drove the new car home, my front door was knocked. The woman introduced herself as Keely. She looked like she was in her late 40s, with well-coiffed hair and a confident demeanor. She carried a clipboard and wore a white polo with the HOA's logo embroidered on it. Behind her was Garrett, a tall man in a similar polo who looked uncomfortable, like he was forced to accompany her. Keely and Garrett wanted to discuss neighborhood standards and community improvements with me. I listened, despite my confusion. They asked how long I had lived here and if I wanted to join the community association. Their words were polite, but I sensed something was off. Keely mentioned that she thought this house was owned by someone who wasn't in the best financial situation, as if that was why I hadn't attended any HOA meetings or paid any fees. In a sweet voice, she suggested they give me a break until I could afford to join. Before I could respond, she raised an eyebrow at the new car in the driveway. "Well, it looks like you're doing quite well," she said. "We might have to reconsider our earlier assumptions, dear." She smiled triumphantly, as if she had caught me in a ruse. Garrett nodded, despite appearing embarrassed. They only lingered long enough to suggest I become a friendly, contributing neighbor, and that they would contact me. I closed the door, confused. I didn't understand their goal, but I felt like I'd see them again. In the following weeks, HOA flyers, meeting notices, and membership dues requests filled my mailbox. This was confusing because my closing documents showed that this property was not in the HOA's territory. Keely sent me their bylaws in an official-looking packet, so I read them out of curiosity. It was clear that the original developer had placed some lots under HOA authority, but my parcel number was excluded. The pamphlet covered landscaping, mailbox designs, paint colors, and other rules that didn't apply to me. I didn't want to be hostile, so I ignored it and went about my business. I believed they would eventually realize I wasn't under their jurisdiction and leave me alone. That hope was naive. Spring had arrived and I was mulching gardens, pruning shrubs, and restaining my fence. I wanted to get everything in shape before the summer heat. I heard an unfamiliar voice clearing their throat behind me while pulling weeds in the backyard on a sunny Saturday. I saw Keely again, flanked by 2 other people, Horace, an older man with a stern expression, and Briella, a younger woman who seemed less stern but looked me over like she was inspecting the property. I stood up and brushed dirt off my gloves, startled they'd come to my backyard unannounced. Keeley explained that the HOA wanted to maximizing community resources by implementing a new volunteer system among homeowners to create short-term rental spaces for travelers. She said the neighborhood could boost its community improvement fund by renting out a room or two in select homes, lowering monthly HOA fees for everyone. Horace interrupted me as I prepared to ask her how that affected me since I wasn't in the association. He cleared his throat slowly and said, "Well, we see that you have a large residence. We've reviewed the floor plans on record, and there appear to be extra rooms you're not using." He looked at me like I was hoarding something everyone should have. Briella nodded, searching papers. Keeley glared at me. They marched into my backyard, uninvited, and told me how many rooms I had. It was surreal. I politely replied that the house is large, but I use every room for different purposes. My relatives use my home office, small workshop, and guest suite. I reminded them that the house was mine, not their HOA, even if I didn't use the rooms. Keeley smiled patronizingly. She said it would be neighborly to help the community, especially since, now we all know you aren't hurting for money. I realized that they had likely seen me in a flashy car and assumed I was rich. My finances were comfortable, but not as lavish as they thought. The charmingly smug Keeley added, "It's only fair that you contribute something, seeing as you're benefiting from the neighborhood's prestige, and you have a top-tier car in your driveway." I couldn't believe it. Prestige, she said. Perhaps I bought this house to gain some intangible status from being near them. I wanted to end the conversation. I explained that I wasn't required to provide anything because my property wasn't subject to their rules or fees. I also requested that they wait for me to answer the front door rather than entering my backyard without my permission. Keeley and Horace persisted, saying they would consider exempting me from HOA monthly fees if I let them set up a short-term rental in one of my rooms. I had to hold back laughter at that absurdity. They were offering me a freebie for something I didn't owe. It was like they didn't realize their bylaws didn't apply to me. Briella took notes and looked at official documents. I wondered if they were bluffing newcomers to force them to comply. I told them I wasn't interested, wasn't in the HOA, and my property was private. She narrowed her eyes. Her snide comment was, "You might not be a member, but the neighborhood sees that you're well off, so you should do your part." She then promised a formal proposal, as if closing a big business deal. Instead of rolling my eyes, I asked them to leave again. After Horace mumbled about me being unpatriotic to the community, they left. Frustrated by their nerve, I exhaled deeply. My weekend started poorly, so I drove my older car to clear my head. A neatly folded leaflet was taped to my front door the following Monday. It was a typed outline of the HOA's short-term rental expansion initiative, which required me to open at least one room for 4 months while the HOA handled scheduling and rental fees and deposited the earnings into a communal fund. The leaflet concluded in bold text, "By agreeing to host, you will be fully exempt from monthly HOA dues." I never paid them because I wasn't required to. The notice included a brief handwritten note saying, "We hope you'll see this is the best solution for everyone. We should be good neighbors. Keeley." I was fed up with indirect methods. I sent a brief, polite letter explaining that I was not part of the HOA, that they had no jurisdiction, and that I respectfully requested they stop contacting me. The bottom of the official proposal had Keeley's address, so I delivered it. A week passed with no word. Perhaps they had received the message. One afternoon, I saw Keeley and Horace on the sidewalk in front of my house pointing at my driveway and house. They were with other people, possible buyers or renters. It looked like a few tourists. Although they didn't enter my property, they were pointing at various features of my yard, referencing a clipboard, and occasionally looking in the windows. It became uncomfortable and harassing. I asked, "Can I help you with something?" From my porch, carrying my phone to record them, Keeley showed forced politeness by smiling. She replied, "Oh no, we're just listing. This house will be perfect for our short-term rental initiative," she said as if it was settled. Her companion, a young couple, asked to see inside. I almost choked on my breath. They pretended it was for sale. I looked twice at their eager smiles. My pulse accelerated. I calmly told them that this was my private home, not a rental program, and that trespassing would occur if they entered without permission. The couple looked confused, glanced at Keeley as if she had said something else. Keeley tightened her face but kept her cool, telling the couple, "We're just finalizing a few formalities." She then ushered them away, her voice dropping to hide the conversation from me. After they left, I felt rushed. Something was wrong and I needed home security. I remembered that the previous owners had installed a security camera system, but I hadn't activated all the features. The next day, I installed new cameras at the front gate, calibrated motion detectors, and connected a camera to monitor the yard and side alley. I wanted to be ready if this escalated. I also posted a few no trespassing signs around the perimeter to make it clear that uninvited visitors were prohibited. 2 more weeks went unharmed. I focused on my home-based work and ignored the possibility that Keely and her friends would return. A loud knock on my door woke me up early Thursday morning. I peeked out to see Keely and Horace with Briella. They became more aggressive and less condescending. Keely quickly stated, "We are here to inform you that the board has voted and we're moving forward with the plan. You can either open a room for us to manage or start paying your fair share of monthly fees, which we've set at a rate more suitable for your financial situation." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. It wasn't just that they came to my door with an absurd announcement. They believed they could enforce it. I quietly stated that I was not their member. I showed the city-recorded property boundaries. I even offered to show them the documents again if they forgot. Horace smiled, approaching. "Look here," he said. "We thought you were some poor person squatting in a big house, but we saw your car and know you can afford it. It's time to step up," he said bluntly, making Keely flinch. He wasn't opposed by her. Briella replied, "Look, the neighborhood is more important than any individual's technicalities." Astonished, I shook my head. "I'm not a member," I repeated. "Your association has no contract, paperwork, or legal obligation. Even if I were, your demands are ridiculous. For profit, you want me to open my house. Not happening." Keely altered her face, blushing. "You have a lot of nerve," she fumed. "We thought you were a financial lightweight, but you were hiding your wealth. Well, the community won't tolerate this." She spun around. Horace and Briella followed. Horace waved a paper as they left, threatening to escalate. I felt uneasy during the 5-minute interaction. It was brazen of them to demand at my door. What would they try next? Later that day, I spoke with my friend Mitch, a nearby property attorney. I told them how the HOA was trying to force me to rent out a room, threatening fees, and entering my property without permission. Mitch basically told me they had no legal basis unless my deed had a hidden clause or restriction. He offered to double-check my documents, but I was sure they were HOA-free. Mitchell advised me to meticulously document everything and call the police if they trespassed again, which I was already doing. After talking to Mitch, I posted a big sign on my front door saying, "Notice, this property is not part of the homeowners association. No solicitation or trespassing allowed. All visitors must have written permission." I didn't want to make my home a fortress, but I needed to protect myself. I left a message on Keely's phone politely stating that I would not comply with their demands and reminding her that future harassment or trespassing would be prosecuted. A month passed without seeing them. I enjoyed morning coffee on my porch, worked on my garden, and drove into town for groceries and supplies. I occasionally saw a HOA member drive slowly by as if watching me, but they never stopped. Zeke, my kind older neighbor across the street, would apologize when I caught him looking my way. I think rumors were circulating that I was a super rich recluse. Nobody bothered me directly. On a hot summer afternoon, everything exploded. While working on an old table I wanted to refinish in my garage, I heard voices in my driveway. I exited and saw Keely and Horace again, this time with a different group of people, some of whom I recognized from the neighborhood. They were talking loudly on my front step, audible from the garage. I walked slowly with my phone because I expected a fight. Keely reacted quickly to my approach. "We've had enough of your attitude," she complained. "We're here to stop your wealth showing and bad neighborliness. Return a room or pay fees." Horace smirked and casually stepped onto my porch, apparently unaware of the prominent no trespassing sign next to the door. My anger flared and I warned them again. "This is private property and you are not allowed here. Leave my porch or I'll call the police." They seemed emboldened. Taryn, another man in the group, started taking pictures of my house with his phone. "We'll show the city that you're neglecting the property or renting illegally," he shouted. The last straw was, "We have ways to get you in line." I started recording with my phone. As I walked away, I called the local police department's non-emergency number and told the dispatcher that a group of people were trespassing on my property, refusing to leave and threatening me. Briella, who had visited before, marched closer while I was on the phone. Her face was furious. "Why are you doing this? Do you realize you'll lose?" she raged. I repeated my address and called officers while holding the phone to my ear. Patrol cars were on their way, according to the dispatcher. Keely was ranting about how people like me were destroying good neighborhoods, hoarding resources, and showing my true wealth with my fancy car. She said, "We used to think you were just some sad case in a big house. We know better. You're loaded and won't help your community." Considering they only wanted my money and property, which they had no legal right to, the irony was overwhelming. Taryn yelled, "Stop calling the police, no trespassing, HOA issue." He didn't realize all of the front yard and porch were covered in recording security cameras. I calmly told him that I had a no trespassing sign, had asked them to leave multiple times, and that every second they stayed on my porch was a violation. They seemed confident they were right or could bluff their way through this. They probably never thought I'd challenge them directly. Within 10 minutes, a police car arrived. 2 officers emerged, a tall, authoritative woman and a professional man. Keely adjusted his strategy and smiled. She addressed them as a concerned neighborhood representative, saying I was mistakenly calling them trespassers. She claimed that I was a HOA member but had not paid my dues, and that they were here to discuss the matter peacefully. The officer politely requested my explanation with her hand. I gave them the property survey, documents proving I wasn't in their HOA, and my camera footage from previous visits, which I had copied to a USB stick after each incident. Mitch advised me to keep backups. The officer glanced and called Keely and Horace over. She asked if they had proof of permission to be on my property. Flipping through HOA bylaws and meeting notes, they stammered. None of it proved they ruled my property. I could tell Keely was getting frustrated. She claimed that the neighborhood standards applied to all houses, but the officer was unimpressed. The officer asked if I wanted them formally trespassed, meaning the police would warn them not to return to my property. Yes, absolutely. After hearing that, Horace raised his voice and stepped forward to intimidate me. The male officer tapped Horace's shoulder to warn him to stay back. After a tense moment, Horace realized he was inches from making a more serious charge and backed off. Police asked the group to disperse and warned them they could be arrested for trespassing if they returned without my permission. He looked ashamed. The officer gave her an official notice, turning her face red and purple. Garrett, Keely's sometimes accompaniment, was absent. Maybe he was smart enough to stay away. After a few minutes of heated debate, the group left, muttering angrily. I thanked the officers, who said I did well by documenting and calling them. It didn't end there. Unknown calls flooded my phone later that night. Some hung up, others left voicemails. The messages said I was destroying the neighborhood spirit, selfish, and made the community look bad in front of the authorities. I blocked them as they entered. I received one text from Keely around midnight. Just in case, I saved the message. "You'll regret this." I tried to move on, hoping the police trespass warning would keep them away. Another few weeks passed quietly. Zeke, a neighbor, brought tomatoes from his garden one afternoon. He seemed nervous, but he told me that the neighborhood had heard that the HOA had spent a lot of money on legal consultations to force me into compliance. He also said that the couple I saw with Keely had nearly put money down on a short-term rental right to one of my rooms, thinking it was done. They were furious at the HOA and threatened to sue or complain loudly that they'd been misled. I thanked Zeke for the info and assured him I was in charge. A month after the trespassing, I got a letter. It was from a HOA attorney threatening legal action if I didn't rectify my neighborhood status. The letter accused me of unfair enrichment at the expense of the community and other absurdities. I sent it to Mitch, who laughed at the language. He replied that the HOA knew my property wasn't under their control and that repeated harassment could result in retaliation. The police trespass warning was also included. We returned that certified mail to their attorney. Lawyer never contacted me again. Meanwhile, the HOA developed more cracks. Zeke and Ariana told me some neighbors were tired of Keely's leadership. They thought she had overstepped her boundaries with me and other issues, like fining people for lawn decorations or making them unhappy about painting their shutters the wrong shade of blue. My experience seemed to push many residents to question her authority. Ariana even mentioned that Horace was rumored to have used the same strong-arm tactics on a neighbor at the other end of the neighborhood. Horace backtracked after that homeowner threatened to call city code enforcement on his illegal deck extension. They seemed to thrive on intimidation until they were rebuffed. An emergency HOA meeting followed. My property fiasco had become local gossip, and many residents saw me as the victim of an overreaching board. Keely was chastised for secretly using HOA funds for that short-term rental scheme and booking prospective guests for a house she had no right to. Although I wasn't at the meeting, Ariana told me several angry people demanded an audit of the HOA's finances. A new board election was rumored, and Keely, Horace, and Briella were facing strong opposition from neighbors fed up with their nonsense. Since I wasn't in the HOA, I couldn't vote, but it was funny to see them experience accountability. Zeke said Keely tried to blame me for leading the community astray and refusing to cooperate during the meeting, but enough people had heard my side that it didn't stick. Significant fallout. Keely resigned after many neighbors refused to follow her. Horace was fined heavily by the city for building a shed without a permit. Briella, who never rose in the HOA, was said to have faded. The short-term rental initiative was important to Ariana because they wanted to raise enough money for a lavish clubhouse renovation that many residents didn't want. The board seemed more concerned with leaving a legacy than serving the neighborhood. I had my final confrontation 3 weeks after the police incident. While mowing my front lawn, I saw Keely walking up the sidewalk alone. She paused at my driveway, considering approaching. To be proactive, I turned off my mower. I approached her, stopping a few yards away to ensure she wasn't trespassing on public property. I waited with folded arms for her words. She inhaled and muttered, "I just want you to know that this could have gone a lot better if you'd been willing to communicate earlier." The nerve! Her delusion made me smile. I calmly reminded her that I had repeatedly stated that I was not in their HOA, had no obligation, and that she and her friends were trespassing. She shook her head, denying blame. "We tried to help you," she said. "We tried to offer you a deal. It was the last straw." I told her, "If you return to my property, I'll call the police. Nothing to negotiate. I'm not in your group and never was. That's it." She stared at me for a moment, then turned and left without saying a word. Her relentless harassment seemed to end when I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My boundaries were strengthened afterward. I was advised by my attorney friend Mitch to file a notice of no affiliation with the HOA at the county recorder. He said it wasn't necessary, but it could serve as a public record of my exempt status in case someone tried something similar. I followed his advice and filed a few days later. If any HOA member crosses the line, it will be in the records that I have nothing to do with them. Over the next few months, the new HOA board, made up of more level-headed residents, wrote me a brief, cordial letter explaining they'd changed leadership and understanding that my property was outside their jurisdiction. They promised not to bother me again and that I could apply voluntarily. They also apologized for previous board overreach. Though I wasn't joining, I appreciated the offer. At least their apology indicated a better turn. I never responded, but I took it as a sign that the neighborhood might start to calm down. The group that accompanied Keely and Horace during the trespassing incident had awkward consequences. Taryn, who took my house photos, was cited for harassing another homeowner over a fence line dispute. Zeke said the new board warned Taryn that they would hire lawyers to protect the neighborhood if he kept harassing residents. He quietly paid a fine and gave up. I heard Briella was getting multiple complaints from neighbors who discovered she had tried to book unauthorized guests for someone else's property. She gave prospective renters out-of-pocket refunds to prevent them from suing the HOA. The short-term rental fiasco soured everyone. Despite the disaster, the neighborhood improved. Apparently, the old board had coerced many quieter residents for years. The new board, desperate to save the HOA's reputation, relaxed landscaping and yard decor rules, allowing homeowners to finally decorate without fear of fines. To increase transparency, they distributed detailed budgets so residents knew where their dues went. Ariana told me that for the first time in years, people were excited to join the association because they felt heard. Ironically, the old board's pressure on me led to a positive reform that benefited everyone. After that, things calmed down. 3 months later, Keely left the neighborhood. Rumor had it she had a huge fight with some of her closest allies after her strong-arm tactics failed and her reputation was ruined. The homeowner listed her house and moved to a neighborhood with a HOA that better suits her need to control everything. I stayed alert despite the calmer atmosphere. I marked my property lines and kept my security cameras on. I kept HOA official mail, even though it was polite after the regime change. I became closer to Zeke as neighbors. He was always eager to share HOA old guard gossip at our barbecues. It was comforting to have a neighbor who respected boundaries and was fair. The following year, I enjoyed my home peacefully. No more intrusions, money demands, or bizarre requests to open my house to strangers. Schedule HVAC maintenance and chase away nighttime garbage can raiding raccoons were my biggest problems. Since many of Keeley's authoritarian overshadows were friendly, I even came to appreciate the community more. The scrutiny they deserved came. Keeley lost power, Horace was fined, Taryn had to calm down, and Briella paid restitution for misleading renters. The neighborhood resolved tensions and established a more transparent, resident-friendly HOA. I moved on, relieved I had protected my home and rights. The best part is that I never had to pay HOA fees because that was never part of the deal. No matter how fancy the car in my driveway, they couldn't make me join. Friends, thank you. See you soon.